Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. I'm Jonathan Hassan, and in today's edition, we're going to focus on the situation in the Gaza Strip. Today we mark, of course, day 693 since Hamas committed its atrocities on October 7th of 2023, during the course of which it murdered some 1,200, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 Israelis, as well as dual nationals, as well as foreign laborers. And today, there was a very special announcement with regard to the retrieval of at least one hostage, unfortunately, who was murdered on October 7th. Nevertheless, he was identified following a medical procedure, and now there's another body of one more who is also being identified. No publication yet as to who he might be for obvious reasons. But I'll start by introducing our experts for today, to include, of course, Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor-at-large, Colonel Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and a senior fellow at ICT at Reichman University, and Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, who is the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. And Mr. Owen, we know, of course, that the people here in Israel, many millions around the world, are very eager to see all hostages returned, with up to 20 of them believed to be still alive. But nonetheless, there was quite the special operation. What can you tell us about that?
So the major news item of the day is indeed the one you cited about a daring intelligence and operational action by Israeli special forces, retrieving the remains of one Be'eri, Kibbutz Be'eri member, Ilan Weiss, who was part of the platoon defending the kibbutz until the IDF was supposed to send reinforcement, which unfortunately did not happen for the first crucial hours, and the remains of another unnamed yet because of family concerns, another hostage, and they are undergoing now forensic examinations. Because one cannot be sure under what conditions these bodies and remains are being kept in Gaza by the perpetrators. So the correct count right now is 48 hostages, 20 of them alive, 28 dead. And we may yet see that because the perpetrators, the hostage takers, the murderers, have a smaller number of human cards to play, they may demand more prisoners released for each hostage, either alive or dead. Now, for the military side, as you said, there are preparations. The population has been warned that it had better move out of the designated areas. But let me also mention an additional development which is quite serious. Yesterday morning, there were reports out of Syria that the Israeli special operation not far from Damascus was intended to disable Turkish surveillance equipment, which was put in place against Israeli targets. Damascus is only some 25 kilometers from the Israeli border, the Israeli deployment, and under certain conditions, it can be observed, or the northernmost and easternmost parts can be observed from the vicinity of Damascus. Now, following that, a few hours ago, the Erdogan regime in Turkey announced the cutoff of all commercial relations with Israel and closing the airspace to Israeli aviation. And obviously, the repercussions will be learned in the days ahead. But this is quite a serious breach in the already tense relationship between Ankara and Jerusalem.
Indeed, it seems like the situation is quite tense between Ankara and Jerusalem for quite some time now. And the AKP faction, an Islamist faction, affiliated, of course, with the Muslim Brotherhood, which President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is leading, is quite vocal and vigorous in its perspective vis-a-vis the fact that Israel is a nation state of the Jewish people on lands viewed as waqf, Islamic holy land, so to speak, and therefore there are also religious perspectives to this. Usually, the political establishments do not discuss those elements, but it is quite significant when we're talking about regional affairs in a manner of political affairs as well. Now, with regard to Ilan Weiss, the hostage that was retrieved, the body of the hostage, if I may, he was murdered. Excuse me. He was murdered when he was on his way to the armory in Kibbutz Be'eri. The platoon you refer to is not an IDF platoon. It is a civilian platoon for the defense of the kibbutz, the community, civilian community. And in this context, he was a civilian in all parameters of international law, and therefore the blatant holding of him and all hostages at that was a blatant breach of international law that has not received enough international emphasis with regard to the demands from such terrorist organizations to return them as speedily necessary. Now, Colonel Ben Shalom, I'd like to hear your perspective with regard to the Gaza Strip. There was another decision made today, and that is to end a certain tactical hiatus with regard to the operational activity in the Gaza Strip. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the term I think is tactical pauses that the IDF once in a while declares in certain locations where we fight. The idea there, of course, is because you're also fighting a brutal terror organization, but also continuously looking out for the civilian population. Just yesterday, I attended in my reserve duty an hour and a half session with our legal department. Brilliant, by the way, and very complex to understand that. But each and every component of military action on the ground has in mind not only the enemy and eliminating Hamas and retrieving the hostages, but of course, how we do it. So tactical pauses is something that sometimes a soldier on the ground can say, hey, I have a momentum here. Why would I stop? Why would I let them rest? But yes, the idea is to have these pauses enable the population to get food and water and medical assistance, etc. The IDF is not obligated to implement these pauses all the time, and they use that sometimes according to the operational tempo. Sometimes the operational tempo does not enable that. I think what we can interpret from the decision of the IDF now is the fact that this is a real plan now to go ahead with this second phase of Gideon's chariots and go into the city of Gaza. And the idea is to tell the population, this is not a place now where you're going to stay and get pauses and you'll be able to manage your lives and we'll go around you because we're going in. So the recommendation is to the population to leave and go to the designated areas. Even here, notice that it's mostly a recommendation because also here, according to international law, we abide by this strict way you can tell the population what to do and how to do it. And here, the main thing for them is to protect them. So the pauses are for protection, and telling them to move to another place now is also for their protection.
Absolutely. IDF spokesman in the Arabic language, Colonel Edri, came out and stated that the Gaza Strip will be evacuated, particularly Gaza City in the Gaza Strip, to ensure the safety of the civilians, to avoid a scenario in which civilians are in an active combat zone. That is a very important move to, of course, mitigate as much as possible any collateral damage, the harm of non-combatants, so to speak. And Israel is proactively doing everything in its capacity to ensure the safety of uninvolved civilians. Now, I'd like to move
Just
to you,
Jonathan,
General.
if I may, I think you said
Go ahead.
the IDF said it will evacuate the Gaza Strip. I think you meant Gaza City, just to make sure, because the IDF has no plan of evacuating the Gaza Strip.
Correct. That is a decision not for the IDF to make. General Gavish, I'd like to ask you, since in all the commotion related to Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere, there was a second consecutive strike in Yemen, this time eliminating the prime minister of the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, alongside at least a dozen of other senior Houthi officials. This comes merely 2 days, or 3 days rather, after the Israeli Air Force conducted a separate strike against Iranian, or rather, well, they're pretty much one and the same at this point, but nonetheless, against Houthi targets in Sana'a, the capital, eliminating also the defense minister and roughly another dozen of senior officials. Now, it seems like there's an uptick in Israeli responses to the quite usual at this point ballistic missile launches from Yemen by this terrorist organization towards Israeli territory.
Well, you're right. I think that what we are seeing is that the IDF, the Israeli Air Force, is leaning more toward offensive operations and strikes in Yemen. We always talk about it, that way of fighting against missiles, rockets, terrorist organization is by a combination of attack operations and defense operations, which basically all of them, we have to say, those are defensive means in order to defend Israel. I think what was significant yesterday, and the results are not fully clear yet. We believe that there are more leaders that were hit during this strike yesterday. I think that we saw what we've seen basically in different arenas. We saw it with the Hamas. What happened to their leaders? We saw it with the Hezbollah and what happened to their leaders, and we also saw it with Iran. And you know, it's a question mark now. How would the Houthis would react to it? We saw that in Hezbollah, for example, it was played in one way, and with the Hamas different way, and maybe with the Iranian third way. But for sure, this is a very effective way of fighting terrorist organization. I think we should all be very proud with what happened yesterday. And as I said, it was not yet fully announced what are the results, but I believe that with the days that are coming, those will be revealed, and it is much more than one of their leaders. And you know, Jonathan, we talked about it in the past, but I think once again, we have really to highlight it. This is a very complex operational attack. The Israeli airplanes have to fly very far. It's more than 2,000 kilometers from Israel. They have to be very precise in what they are doing. And there is a lot of efforts which are around them, starting with the intelligence effort, SAR efforts, planning efforts, of course, coordinating with regional players, of course, CENTCOM, and others, just to make sure that we are not stepping on anyone's toes while we are doing it. So this is a complex attack. I think we should be very proud with what was done by the Israeli Air Force. And days will say what are the results and what would be the reaction of the Houthis. But the bottom line, I think that they understand that Israel means business, and if they would continue, there is a price for it, and the price is getting higher.
Indeed, I think it's quite evident that Israel is engaged in power dominance, so to speak, or power escalation, some may call it, which ultimately entails two ladders. The Houthis have ladders, and the Israelis have a ladder. Each time the Houthis raise that ladder or continue to consistently, due to a lack of an abundance of munitions, to rise up the certain level of that ladder, Israel's just going to climb up and up and up until the point in time where they feel the brunt of what qualitative military edge actually means, when one is willing to utilize all of the tools of power, or tools of politics, so to speak. Time will tell. But one additional point is also quite evident, which we need to be thankful for, beyond the fact that all the pilots and the collaborative effort with the Israeli Navy, all of the Israeli troops are safe and sound in this context, is the intelligence penetration. There was a lack of intelligence for quite some time, which was spoken about by the Americans and others in the region with regard to the Houthis. It seems that Israel has quite effectively penetrated the ranks of this terrorist Iranian proxy, and we will have to see how those various developments evolve in the days and months ahead. Now, Mr. Orenz, for a lack of time, I'd like to divert our attention to Lebanon, but rather in New York City, where at the United Nations headquarters, the Security Council convened and announced, or rather voted upon, the last time that UNIFIL's mandate will ever be extended.
So, going back to 1978 and the so-called Litani operation, which came after a very, very lethal terrorist attack in Israel, not too far from Tel Aviv, actually on the very northern outskirts of Tel Aviv. Israel, for the first time, raided in force southern Lebanon, stayed on in two enclaves with the support of local forces, and UNIFIL was set up. And obviously, the first eye in UNIFIL is interim. This interim has now gone on for almost 40 years, almost 50 years rather. So the Israeli General Staff from the very first moment hated UNIFIL. And the first chief of UNIFIL, General Erskine, was called by the Israeli Chief of General Staff at the time, Raful Eitan, BBC, Big Black Chief. And he didn't mean it as a compliment. The UNIFIL troops were considered an obstacle to Israeli operations in South Lebanon, because rather than stop what was first the Palestinian terrorist activity and then Hezbollah, the Shiite terrorist activity, they stood aside, cast a blind eye to what was happening. And when Israel acted, they complained. So if they go out, if the whole setup in South Lebanon is now changed, Israel is deployed there, Hezbollah is operating under a demand by the government of Lebanon to disarm, there is no need for UNIFIL. There is also no need for UNDOF, the counterpart on the Golan Heights. But that's for another day.
Indeed. Well, just to point out from an objective perspective with regard to UNIFIL's conduct, one, their mandate was very limited, and two, they were more busy with force protection than the mandate granted to them in a very complex situation where Hezbollah, not once and not twice, has killed members of UNIFIL were they to pass the so-called red lines that this Iranian proxy has set for them. And the same went with Fatah back in the day, where the Palestinians were also quite violent against UNIFIL anytime they breached it. So force protection was their number one goal. Number two was to try and be helpful as much as possible. And on a number of occasions, when the United States and others have actually approached Israel and said, okay, let's end the mandate, Israel was very quick to say, no, we'd like to have that addressed to communicate with the other side. So it was not always the hostile approach. Yes, there was hostile rhetoric, and UNIFIL did not fulfill its obligations under the mandate that was granted to it, but nonetheless, it was an important component of international peacemaking, so to speak, that did its best in a very tough environment. So,
but Jonathan, let me just remark, it had to do a lot with the force commanders, especially Italian generals were very positive. General Graziani was a very good buddy of former Chief of General Staff Eisenkotz. But some of the troops, even though they had to protect themselves, became goodwill ambassadors for the other side when they went back home. So on the diplomatic or public diplomacy front, it was a net minus for Israel.
I agree. I completely agree. And history is evident, recording whatever UNIFIL ultimately conducted. And two wars are also the culmination of that attitude. Colonel Ben Shalom, France, Britain, and Germany, we spoke about it yesterday, and General Sofrin, who was on the show, gave that scoop to our viewers. But ultimately, we are glad to see, and I say this mildly, that Paris, London, and Berlin have come out and decided to trigger the snapback mechanism, imposing a long list of new sanctions on the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, I think it is good news. It's not like they already imposed the sanctions. It's that they triggered the 30-day process that was depicted in the JCPOA. And if this process goes through, then in 30 days, the sanctions will snap back on. They had no choice because the original agreement had a due date. Remember also that Iran, or actually some of the countries were debating if to postpone the limits of the snapback, and ultimately it wasn't done, and Iran disagreed, and the other partners that are signatories, that China and Russia, probably would not enable that anyway. So bottom line, there is a deadline, and because there is a deadline, they reached the point where they had to or turn it on or do nothing. And since they clearly declare that Iran is in non-compliance, they triggered this mechanism. This is not the end. This does not mean that there's going to be sanctions. It doesn't mean that Iran is going to capitulate, perhaps even the opposite. They just now declared they're going to start pulling back from the NPT. Maybe those are real threats. Maybe it's only threats. Maybe it's real. I don't know. It's not the end, but certainly, finally, this mechanism is going on the right track.
Indeed. Well, it is indeed a 30-day mechanism. The deadline was on the 18th of October, later this year. But within 30 days, there is a vote. There is no vote. It just takes effect. So by triggering it, it's a done deal pretty much. And those list of sanctions will be ultimately imposed on Iran with one very important UN Security Council resolution that prevents Iran from enriching uranium and rendering its claims that under the NPT it has the capabilities to enrich will become null and void. So that's quite significant. Germany has, of course, asked its citizens to leave as quickly as possible, to leave Iran, since the Ayatollah regime is notorious, of course, for implementing the so-called hostage diplomacy. And I expect also the French, who have already called on their citizens to leave Iran, as well as the British, to follow suit once more to ensure that the Iranians will not kidnap any dual nationals or foreign nationals for the purpose of this type of diplomacy. But nonetheless, General Gavish, we don't have very much time left, and we do hear in Iran that they're becoming more and more hostile, rhetorically speaking, towards Israel, claiming also that they have new types of ballistic munitions. What can you tell us about that?
First of all, you're right. We do see that there is, at least from a rhetorical point of view, we hear more and more. And I think that, what is happening now, I'm very, I would say, optimistic from one hand, and then from the other hand, I think that we should also prepare ourselves to to all kind of other options. I'm optimistic with what is happening. I'm optimistic that the Europeans countries, although with all the challenges that we have with them, at least on this issue of the Iranians, they are quite consistent, and I'm looking forward, because I believe it would come the day that the Trump administration would say to the Iranians, "Okay, guys, I mean, this is the decision time, and let's make decision. And if we won't make a decision, there would be consequences to it." So the Iranians could say what they want. I think that they are doing it mainly because of what is happening inside, and they want to show their own people that they are still strong. This is what they did this quite big exercise a week or two ago. But when you look at deep, I think that their situation is becoming more and more challenging, and I want to believe with the continuously pressure by the international community, by the United States, they would get to this point that they would have to make decisions with regard to their nuclear plan. And as I said before, there is always the other option, which is open, and we already show that we are willing to execute it.
As the ancient Roman wisdom goes, si vis pacem para bellum, Latin for when you want peace, prepare for war. I'd like to immediately thank Mr. Amir Oren, Colonel Ben Shalom, and General Gavish for all of your valuable insights. I'd like also to thank all of you at home. We are, of course, heading into the weekend, so from me here and the team in Jerusalem, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and until our next update. The Middle East, home to the cradle of civilization, retains a reputation from time immemorial as one of the most complex, conflict-ridden regions of the world. A cluster of nations, religions, powers, and influences, Mideast intricacies pose conundrums to even the most astute individuals. Bombarded daily, indeed every minute, by a barrage of information, some accurate, yet most of it less so, TV7 Israel invites you to watch and hear some of the most knowledgeable experts, most of whom partook in creating policies shaping this region today. Join us for Jerusalem Studio every Tuesdays and Fridays for content that truly matters.